The Apache woman knelt in the dust outside Murphy's saloon, blood on her torn calico dress, while men bid on her like livestock. The makeshift wooden platform creaked under the auctioneer's boots as he called out prices to the crowd of 30-odd men gathered in Tucson's main street. "What am I bid for this Apache squaw?" Hammond's voice cut through the desert air. "She's housebroke, can cook, won't run far with that face." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, $5 for the scarred squaw." More cruel jokes followed about her damaged goods and worthless breeding stock. Small Dove lifted her head with quiet dignity, her dark eyes meeting the crowd without flinching. When she spoke, her English was clear as mountain water. "No man wants me. I know this truth." The laughter died like wind before a storm. Tom Brennan pushed through the crowd, his weathered hand resting on his Colt revolver, jaw set like granite. $50? His voice cut through the murmur like a cavalry saber. The crowd turned, recognizing the lone rancher who kept to himself in the Dragoon Mountains. Auctioneer Hammond grinned wide, sold to the fool with more money than sense. As Brennan stepped forward to claim her, the thunder of hoofbeats echoed down the street. Captain Morrison's cavalry patrol rounded the corner, blue uniforms stark against the desert dust. The cavalry horses snorted and stamped as Captain Morrison surveyed the scene from his saddle, his pale eyes fixed on the transaction below. Brennan counted out 50 silver dollars into Hammond's greasy palm, while the officer watched with the cold interest of a hawk studying prey. "Mighty interesting purchase, Brennan," Morrison called down, his voice carrying the authority of federal stripes. "You know the territorial government's got special interest in tracking all Apache movements." Brennan untied the rope from Small Dove's wrists, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Reckon I'm buying property legal-like. Captain, got witnesses and everything." Morrison's smile never reached his eyes. "Course you are. Just remember, harboring enemy combatants is a federal offense, even ones bought fair and square." The warning hung in the desert air like smoke. Small Dove stood slowly, testing her freed hands, watching the exchange between the two white men who seemed to know each other. There was history here, cold and complicated. "Tom Brennan," called out Banker Williamson, pushing through the crowd with his gold watch chain gleaming. "You sure you know what you're doing? Man crosses certain lines, can't uncross them." Brennan helped Small Dove down from the platform, treating her with the same steady respect he'd show any lady. The crowd murmured at this unexpected courtesy. "Reckon I know my own mind, Williamson." "Your credit's good now," the banker continued, "but associating with hostiles, well, that affects a man's standing in the community. Business relationships, supply deliveries." The threat was clear as desert sunrise. Brennan's ranch depended on town cooperation for everything from horseshoes to winter supplies. Cross the wrong people, and a man could find himself cut off from civilization entirely. Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. "You fought with honor in the war. Brennan, don't throw that away for some scarred squaw. There's plenty of Mexican girls in town if you're lonely." Small Dove's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Brennan's voice stayed level as creek water. "Appreciate the advice, Captain. Now, if you'll excuse us, we got a long ride ahead." The 2-hour journey to Brennan's ranch passed mostly in silence. Small Dove rode the spare horse he'd brought, sitting straight-backed despite her exhaustion. As they climbed into the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains, she finally spoke. "You do not know what you have done," she said quietly. "They will come for me, and when they do, they will kill you for harboring me." Brennan studied the horizon, where Apache smoke signals had been rising since dawn. 3 separate columns, spaced across the mountains like sentries. Figured that might be the case. Then why? Her dark eyes searched his weathered face. Why spend your money? Why risk your life? He was quiet for a long moment, considering. Had a sister once. She was different, simple-minded. Folks said. Town treated her like she was worth nothing. Figured nobody deserves that. Your sister, what happened to her? Died when I was fighting in Virginia, alone. His voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. Reckon I can't change that. But I can change this. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, leaving the dust and noise of Tucson behind. The desert spread out below them, harsh and beautiful, holding its secrets close. When they finally reached Brennan's ranch, Small Dove saw a place that surprised her. The buildings were simple but well-maintained, with clean lines and careful attention to detail. A man who lived with discipline and purpose. Water flowed from a spring into stone channels that nourished a small garden. Cattle grazed in the distance, fat and content. Old Pete emerged from the barn, moving with the careful gait of a man whose joints remembered too many hard years. His weathered Mexican face broke into a grin when he saw Brennan. "Patron, you're back early." His eyes moved to Small Dove with curiosity, but no hostility. "And you brought a guest." "Pete, this is Mary," Brennan said, using her Christian name. "She'll be staying with us." Pete nodded respectfully. "Senora." "Welcome to our home." Small Dove blinked in confusion. No one had called her Senora in. She couldn't remember how long. The simple courtesy hit her like a physical blow. "I will work," she said quickly. "I can cook, clean, tend animals. I earn my keep." Brennan dismounted and began unsaddling his horse. "Figured you might be tired from the day. There's a clean room in the cabin, and Pete's got stew on the fire." That evening, as they sat around the simple wooden table sharing Pete's rabbit stew, Small Dove waited for the trap to spring, for the demand, the price, the inevitable cruelty, but it never came. As she lay on the clean straw mattress Brennan had prepared for her, listening to the night sounds of the desert, she heard something that made her blood run cold. In the distance, echoing off the canyon walls, came the deep rhythm of Apache war drums. 3 different locations, all around them. They knew she was here. Small Dove woke before dawn, as was her way. Through the cabin's single window, she could see Brennan already moving through his morning routine, checking the horses, examining the water channels, scanning the horizon with the practiced eye of a man who'd spent years watching for trouble. She dressed quickly in the clean clothes he'd provided and stepped outside. The desert air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine this was real, that she was safe. "Sleep well?" Brennan asked, not looking up from the bridle he was mending. "The drums stopped an hour before sunrise," she replied. He nodded. "Heard them too. Your people?" "My uncle's war party, Red Hawk." She knelt beside the fire Pete was building. "He was my father's war chief. Now he leads what remains of our band." "What's he want?" Small Dove stared into the flames. "To bring me home, or to kill me as a traitor. Apache law is complex." Pete looked up from his coffee pot. "Senora, you speak Apache?" "Si, también español, and the tongue of the Diné, a little. She accepted the tin cup Pete offered. The missionaries taught me many languages, said it would make me more useful. Brennan finally looked at her directly. Useful for what? Translation: converting other Indians to the white man's God, convincing them to accept reservation life. Her voice carried old bitterness. I was to be their bridge between worlds. But you ended up at that auction instead. Small Dove's hand moved unconsciously to the scars on her cheek. I was unsuitable for their purposes. The scarring made me unmarketable as a civilized Indian, so they sold me for whatever they could get. The three of them sat in silence as the sun climbed higher. Finally, Brennan stood and walked to his horse. Pete, show Mary around the place. I'm riding the north pasture. Patron, is that wise? With the Apache watching? They want to see what kind of man I am. Hiding in the cabin won't tell them much. After he rode out, Pete showed Small Dove the ranch operations, the vegetable garden that struggled against the desert heat, the root cellar carved into the hillside, the workshop where Brennan repaired tools and tack with careful precision. He is a good man, your patron? She asked. Pete considered this seriously. Si, very good, very alone. He came here after the war, bought this land from a Mexican family moving south, works hard, pays fair wages, never lies. He paused. But he carries ghosts, you understand. The war did things to him. What kind of things? He was a medic, saw too much death, too much suffering, tried to save everyone, Confederate, Union, didn't matter to him. Even tried to help wounded Apache when the cavalry attacked their camps. Small Dove went very still. Which camps? I don't know all the names. But there was one, Cañón de los Embudos. Very bad business. The lieutenant ordered the attack on peaceful families. Tom tried to stop it, tried to help the wounded after, nearly got court-martialed for defying orders. The tin cup slipped from Small Dove's hands, clattering on the stone. Cañón de los Embudos, the place where her family died, where she was taken. Señora, are you well? She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The white medic who had tried to help her dying mother, who had argued with the soldiers, who had been dragged away while her people bled in the dust. She remembered his face now, younger, beardless, but those same steady gray eyes. Tom Brennan had been there, had witnessed the massacre, had tried to help. When he returned at midday, she was waiting by the corral. He took one look at her face and knew. You remember, he said quietly. You were the medic at the canyon. Yes. You tried to save my mother. I tried. Wasn't enough. His voice was heavy with old guilt. I'm sorry. Small Dove studied his weathered face, seeing past the scars and lines to the young soldier who had defied his own people to show mercy. The lieutenant who ordered the attack, what was his name? Morrison. Miles Morrison. Brennan's jaw tightened. He's a captain now. The same Morrison who... The same one who was watching us in town. Yes. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Morrison knew who she was, knew what she had witnessed. That's why he was so interested in Brennan's purchase. She wasn't just any Apache, she was evidence of his war crimes, as if summoned by their conversation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the main trail. But these weren't the measured beats of cavalry horses. These were Apache ponies, moving fast and light across the desert floor. Small Dove grabbed Brennan's arm. Hide, now. If they see you with me, I'm not hiding. His voice was calm but final. This is my land, and you're under my protection. The riders appeared at the ridge, 5 Apache warriors in traditional dress, war paint bright against their bronze skin. At their head rode a man Small Dove recognized with both joy and terror. Red Hawk, her uncle, the war chief who had sworn to kill any Apache who willingly lived among whites. Too late to run now, Brennan said quietly, his hand moving to rest on his rifle. Whatever happens, stay behind me. The war party descended toward the ranch like thunder rolling down from the mountains, and Small Dove felt the last of her fragile peace shatter like glass. The Apache riders stopped 50 yards from the cabin, close enough to talk, far enough to retreat quickly if needed. Red Hawk sat his pony with the dignity of a man born to command, his weathered face unreadable as carved stone. He wore traditional dress, buckskin and silver, a single eagle feather in his graying hair. Small Dove, he called in Apache, his voice carrying across the desert air like distant thunder. Why do you live as a white man's woman? She stepped forward, placing herself between Brennan and her uncle. I live as I choose. Uncle, as a free person. Free? Red Hawk's laugh was harsh. You were sold like a horse. That is not freedom. I was bought, she replied steadily, but I was not claimed. This man has asked nothing of me except that I live with dignity. The war chief's dark eyes moved to Brennan, studying him with the intensity of a hunter evaluating prey. You, white man, do you know who she is? Brennan met his gaze without flinching. I know she's a woman who deserves better than she's been given. She is Cochise's daughter. The blood of chiefs runs in her veins. Then she deserves even more respect than I've shown her. Red Hawk was quiet for a long moment, considering this response. Finally, he spoke again in Apache. Small Dove, you have 3 days. Return to your people, or be declared dead to the tribe. The choice is yours. But choose quickly. The whites are planning something. We have seen many bluecoats moving toward the border. Without another word, the war party wheeled and rode away, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Pete emerged from the barn where he'd been watching with his rifle ready. What did he say, Senora? Small Dove translated the ultimatum, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. 3 days to choose between 2 worlds, neither of which had shown her much kindness. What will you do? Brennan asked. I don't know. The honest answer surprised her. For so long, survival had been her only goal. Now, for the first time in years, she had a choice to make. That evening, as they sat around the fire, Small Dove found herself watching Brennan as he cleaned his rifle with methodical care. Everything he did was precise, deliberate, touched with the discipline of a soldier who had learned that sloppy work meant death. The war, she said quietly. Pete told me you were a medic. Brennan's hands never paused in their work. Some things a man don't like to remember, but they follow him anyway. Yes, they do. He held the rifle up to the firelight, checking the barrel for obstruction. You have nightmares, too. It wasn't a question. Small Dove nodded. The slavers, the things they did to break my spirit. Did they succeed? She considered this. I thought so, until today, until your uncle called me Cochise's daughter, and I remembered what that meant. What does it mean? That I come from people who never surrendered. who chose death over dishonor. She looked up at the stars scattered across the desert sky. I had forgotten that. Brennan set the rifle aside and poured coffee from the pot Pete had left warming by the fire. Sometimes forgetting is survival. Sometimes remembering is. Which is this? Reckon that's for you to decide. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Finally, Small Dove spoke again. May I ask you something? Go ahead. When you saw me on that platform, what did you see? Brennan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Saw a person being treated like property. Saw someone who deserved better. He looked at her directly. Saw courage. Courage? I was bound and helpless. You held your head up, spoke your truth, never begged or groveled. He stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night. That's courage. Small Dove felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but opening like a flower to sunlight. When had anyone last spoken to her with such simple respect? I need to show you something, she said suddenly. She rose and went into the cabin, returning with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a piece of broken mirror, the silvered glass reflecting the firelight in fractured pieces. The missionaries gave this to me, said I needed to see myself clearly, to understand my limitations. She held up the mirror, showing her scarred reflection. Look, this is what I am, what I will always be. Brennan reached out and gently took the mirror from her hands. Without ceremony, he turned it face down on the ground. A person's worth ain't measured by their face, he said quietly. It's measured by what they do when the world tries to break them. He untied the blue cavalry neckerchief from around his throat and held it out to her. This was my regiment's colors. Carried it through every battle, every march. Now I'd like you to have it. Small Dove stared at the offered cloth. I cannot. It is too precious. That's why I want you to have it. Her hands trembled as she accepted the neckerchief. Such a small thing, but it represented acceptance, protection, perhaps even the beginning of something deeper. Thank you, she whispered. Get some rest, Brennan said, banking the fire for the night. Tomorrow we figure out what comes next. But as Small Dove lay on her clean straw mattress, the cavalry neckerchief folded carefully beside her pillow, she heard the sound that had haunted her dreams for weeks. Hoofbeats in the distance, moving fast, coming closer. Through the cabin window, she saw torches flickering against the night sky, still miles away, but approaching steady as death. The riders weren't Apache this time. The riders materialized out of the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts of war. Sheriff Hawkins led the group, but Small Dove could see this wasn't an official visit. The men behind him wore the hard faces of vigilantes, townspeople armed with rifles and rope, their torches casting wild shadows against the cabin walls. Brennan emerged with his rifle ready, but pointed at the ground. Morning, Sheriff. You're riding early. Hawkins dismounted slowly, his weathered face grim. Tom, I need to speak with you. Alone. Whatever you got to say, you can say in front of Mary and Pete. The sheriff glanced at Small Dove, who stood in the cabin doorway, wrapped in Brennan's neckerchief like armor. Can't do that, Tom. This is official business. Then show me your warrant. Don't have one. This is a friendly warning. Hawkins stepped closer, lowering his voice. Captain Morrison's been asking questions. Federal questions. About harboring enemy combatants. Brennan's jaw tightened. What kind of questions? The kind that end with a rope if you answer wrong. The sheriff's eyes were troubled. Tom, I've known you since you came to this territory. You're a good man, but you're playing with fire here. What do you mean? Hawkins glanced back at his men, then leaned closer. Morrison ain't just some cavalry officer. He's got connections in Washington, important ones, and he wants that Apache girl bad. Why? That's what you need to understand. Tom, this ain't about some scarred squaw from an auction. This is about something bigger. The sheriff's voice dropped to a whisper. Word is, she's Cochise's daughter, the one everyone thought was dead. Small Dove felt the blood drain from her face. She'd hoped her identity would remain hidden, that she could simply disappear into this new life. But secrets had a way of surfacing in the desert, like bones after a flash flood. Even if that's true, Brennan said carefully, she's done nothing wrong. Wrong? Hawkins shook his head. Tom, if she's who Morrison thinks she witnessed things, bad things, things that could destroy careers. What kind of things? But before the sheriff could answer, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats cut through the morning air. Morrison's cavalry patrol crested the ridge. Blue uniforms stark against the red rock. The captain sat his horse like a man born to command. But Small Dove could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes immediately found her standing in the doorway. Sheriff Hawkins, Morrison called as he rode up. I see you've beaten me to it. Just having a friendly conversation, Captain. Morrison's pale eyes fixed on Small Dove. For a moment, recognition flickered across his features, quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. Miss, he said with mock courtesy. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Her name's Mary, Brennan said flatly. Mary. Morrison smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Tell me, Mary, do you remember a place called Cañón de los Embudos? Small Dove went rigid. The canyon where her family died, where she'd been captured, where a young lieutenant named Morrison had ordered the slaughter of peaceful Apache families during what was supposed to be a parley. I think you have me confused with someone else, she said carefully. Oh, I don't think so. Morrison dismounted and stepped closer, studying her scarred face with the intensity of a man examining evidence. You see, there was a girl at that canyon, Cochise's daughter. She escaped during the confusion, but not before she saw everything. The threat was clear as desert sunshine. Small Dove forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. I know nothing of these things. Course you don't. Morrison's smile was cold as January wind. Just like I'm sure you know nothing about the other Apache camps we visited, the families we relocated, the children who found new homes with grateful Mexican families. The words hit Small Dove like physical blows. He wasn't just talking about the massacre. He was talking about slavery, about Apache children sold across the border like livestock. Brennan stepped between them. I think you've said enough, Captain. Have I? Morrison's hand moved to rest on his saber hilt. Mr. Brennan, you're harboring a fugitive. Someone wanted for questioning in federal crimes. What crimes? Murder, theft, inciting rebellion. Morrison ticked them off on his fingers. The penalty for harboring such a person is severe. Sheriff Hawkins cleared his throat. Captain, without a warrant, I don't need a warrant to question a suspected hostile. Morrison's voice turned hard. This is a military matter now. He stepped closer to Small Dove, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the fear in his eyes masked as authority. You have 24 hours to turn yourself in for questioning. After that, I'll be back with a full company to collect you. And if she refuses? Brennan asked. Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Then we'll discuss the penalties for treason against the United States government. The captain remounted and wheeled his horse toward the trail. 24 hours. Brennan, don't make this harder than it needs to be. As the cavalry patrol disappeared into the desert heat, Small Dove felt the walls of her fragile sanctuary crumbling. Morrison knew exactly who she was, knew what she'd witnessed, and he would kill her before he'd let her testify to his crimes. Tom, she said quietly, there's something I need to tell you about that canyon. Small Dove's hands shook as she poured coffee, the memories of Cañón de los Embudos flooding back like poison in her veins. It was supposed to be a peace meeting, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. The white flag was flying. My father sent me with the women and children because he said we had nothing to fear. Brennan sat across from her at the rough wooden table, Pete hovering nearby with the protective instincts of a grandfather. The morning sun streamed through the cabin window, but its warmth couldn't chase away the chill of her words. Morrison was a lieutenant then, young, ambitious. He wanted to make a name for himself. She wrapped her hands around the tin cup, seeking its heat. The talks were going well. My father was ready to discuss moving the band to the reservation. Then Morrison gave a signal. What kind of signal? He dropped his hat. Such a small thing. Small Dove's voice grew hollow. The soldiers opened fire, all of them, into the crowd of families, women holding babies, old men who could barely walk. Pete crossed himself. Madre de Dios! I saw Morrison shoot my grandfather in the back as he tried to shield my little cousin. Saw him laugh when my aunt begged for her baby's life. The cup trembled in her hands. You tried to stop it. You were shouting at the soldiers, trying to reach the wounded. Morrison ordered you arrested. Brennan's jaw worked silently. I remember. Court-martial said I was interfering with a lawful military action. Lawful? Small Dove's laugh was bitter as alkali water. They loaded the surviving children into wagons, drove them south to the Mexican slavers waiting at the border. Morrison got $20 a head. The cabin fell silent except for the desert wind sighing through the eaves. Finally, Brennan spoke. How many children? 70. The youngest was 3 years old. Small Dove met his eyes. I escaped during the confusion, hid in the rocks for 2 days, watching them load the wagons, listening to the children cry for their mothers. That's why Morrison wants you dead. Not just wants, needs. I'm the only witness left alive. Pete moved to the window, scanning the horizon with worried eyes. Patron, we have another problem. Look. In the distance, a line of riders was approaching from the direction of town. Too many to be another cavalry patrol. Too organized to be drifters. Tucson Vigilance Committee, Brennan said grimly, recognizing the banner one rider carried. Morrison's not waiting 24 hours. Small Dove stood quickly. I should go. Face them alone. You've done enough. Sit down. Brennan's voice carried quiet authority. This is my land, my choice. The vigilantes stopped at the property line. 20 men armed with rifles and righteous anger. Banker Williamson rode at their head, his gold watch chain glinting in the sun. Behind him, Small Dove recognized faces from the auction, men who had bid on her like livestock, now come to reclaim their entertainment. "Tom Brennan," Williamson called across the distance. "You got 1 hour to send that Apache out here. We're taking her back to town for proper questioning." Brennan stepped onto the porch, his rifle cradled in his arms. "She's done nothing wrong." "Wrong?" One of the men laughed harshly. "She's a goddamn Apache." "The federal government wants her for questioning," Williamson added. "You're interfering with justice." "Whose justice?" Brennan's voice carried across the desert air. "The kind that sells children to slavers?" A murmur ran through the vigilante ranks. Williamson's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Brennan stepped to the edge of the porch. "How much did Morrison pay you boys to ride out here?" "Same rate he paid for Apache children. $20 a head." The accusation hit like a thunderclap. Several vigilantes shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. They might be willing to intimidate an Apache woman, but child slavery was a different matter entirely. "That's a serious charge, Brennan," Williamson said carefully. "Got a serious witness to back it up." Williamson's eyes found Small Dove standing in the doorway. "Apache testimony ain't worth spit in any court." "Maybe not, but a federal investigation might be interested in hearing it anyway." The banker's confident facade cracked slightly. Behind him, some of the vigilantes were talking in low voices, their enthusiasm clearly waning. Whatever Morrison had told them to justify this raid, it hadn't included details about murdered children and slavery. 1 hour, Brennan, Williamson repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. "Send her out, or we'll come get her." As the vigilantes rode away, Pete moved to the gun rack and began checking rifles. "How many cartridges do we have, Patron?" "Enough." Brennan turned to Small Dove. "There's a way out of this. You could ride south, cross into Mexico, start over where Morrison can't reach you." Small Dove touched the cavalry neckerchief around her throat. "And leave you to face them alone. What kind of person would that make me?" "A smart one." "My father always said that courage and wisdom were not the same thing, but sometimes wisdom means choosing when to be brave." She met his eyes steadily. "I choose now." As if to punctuate her words, a new sound drifted across the desert, the deep, rhythmic beating of Apache war drums, not from one direction, but from 3, north, south, and east, surrounding the ranch like thunder before a storm. The vigilantes weren't the only ones who had decided to make their move. The Apache war drums spoke their ancient language across the desert, each beat carrying messages older than memory. Small Dove stood on the porch beside Brennan, translating the rhythm that echoed from the surrounding hills. 3 war parties, she said quietly. Maybe 60 warriors total. They're asking for parley. Your uncle? Red Hawk leads the largest group. The others. She listened more carefully to the subtle variations in the drumming. Mongus Colorado's sons, and some of Victorio's band. Brennan felt the weight of impossibility settling on his shoulders. Apache to the north, south, and east, vigilantes to the west. Morrison's cavalry could arrive at any moment, and all of them wanted the woman standing beside him. What do the drums say about their intentions? Small Dove was quiet for a long moment, her face troubled. That's strange. They're not calling for war. They're calling for judgment. Before Brennan could ask what that meant, movement on the eastern ridge caught his attention. A single Apache rider descended toward the ranch, carrying a lance with white cloth tied to its point, the universal sign for parley. "Red Hawk," Small Dove breathed. Her uncle rode with the dignity of a man born to lead, his war pony picking its way carefully down the rocky slope. He stopped 50 yards from the cabin and dismounted, planting his lance in the earth. The white cloth stirred in the desert breeze. "Small Dove," he called in Apache, "I come to speak with you and the white man who claims to protect you." Brennan set his rifle aside and walked out to meet the war chief. Small Dove close behind him, up close. Red Hawk was impressive, tall and lean, with the scars of a dozen battles marking his bronze skin. His dark eyes held the weight of a people's suffering. "You are Brennan," Red Hawk said in careful English. "The soldier who tried to save our people at the canyon." "I am." "My niece says you have shown her honor. This is unexpected." Small Dove stepped forward. "Uncle, this man asks nothing of me except that I live with dignity. He has given me shelter, protection, respect." Red Hawk studied Brennan with the intensity of a hunter evaluating prey. "Among our people, a man who protects a woman becomes responsible for her. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" "I am." "Even if it means death?" "Yes." The war chief was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of tradition. "There is something you do not understand. White man, my niece is not just any Apache woman. She is Cochise's daughter. The blood of chiefs runs in her veins. Then she deserves even more honor than I've shown her." Red Hawk's eyes widened slightly, clearly not the answer he'd expected. "You would stand before the combined war chiefs of 3 Apache bands and claim the right to protect Cochise's daughter?" "I would, even knowing that failure means your death and hers." Brennan met the war chief's gaze without flinching. "I gave my word. A man's worth is measured by the promises he keeps." Small Dove felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She had expected her uncle to demand her return or threaten Brennan with death. This formal challenge was something else entirely, a test of worthiness according to Apache law. "Uncle," she said carefully, "what are you proposing?" Red Hawk smiled for the first time since arriving. "The war chiefs have debated through the night. Some want to take you home by force. Others want to kill you as a traitor. But I proposed a third path, which is, we test this white man's courage. If he proves worthy of a chief's daughter, the Apache nation will honor his claim. If he fails," Red Hawk shrugged eloquently. "What kind of test?" Brennan asked. Before Red Hawk could answer, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats announced Morrison's arrival. The captain rode at the head of a full cavalry troop, 30 soldiers in blue uniforms, dust devils swirling around their horses' hooves. Morrison reined up hard when he saw the Apache war chief standing calmly beside Brennan and Small Dove. His pale eyes darted between the 3 figures, calculating odds and angles like a gambler studying his cards. "What the hell is this?" Morrison demanded, his hand moving to his saber hilt. Red Hawk turned slowly to face the cavalry officer, his expression unreadable as carved stone. "I am Red Hawk, war chief of the Chiricahua. I come under flag of truce to test this white man's worthiness." "Worthiness for what?" "To protect my niece." Morrison's face went white, then flushed red with rage. "Your niece? That's impossible." "Cochise's daughter died years ago." "Did she?" Red Hawk's voice was soft as silk, deadly as a rattlesnake's warning. "Or did she escape from a certain canyon where peaceful families were murdered under a white flag?" The captain's hand tightened on his weapon. I don't know what lies this savage has been telling you, but—" "No lies," Small Dove interrupted, stepping forward with quiet dignity. "Only truth. I am Small Dove, daughter of Cochise, and I saw what you did at Cañón de los Embudos." Morrison's mask of authority finally slipped, revealing the desperate man beneath. "You're mistaken. There was no massacre, only a lawful military action against hostile Indians." "Then why do you fear her testimony?" Red Hawk asked mildly. The war chief's calm demeanor seemed to unnerve Morrison more than threats would have. The captain looked around wildly, taking in the Apache warriors visible on the surrounding ridges, the determined set of Brennan's jaw, the quiet strength in Small Dove's eyes. "This is federal business," Morrison said finally. "I'm ordering you to disperse and turn over the prisoner." "Prisoner?" Red Hawk's eyebrows rose. "I see no prisoner here, only my niece, who has chosen to live under the protection of an honorable man." "Honorable? He's harboring a fugitive. From whose justice? Yours?" The war chief's voice carried contempt, sharp as obsidian. "The justice that murders children, that sells Apache babies to Mexican slavers?" Morrison drew his saber, the blade ringing as it cleared the scabbard. "That's enough." The cavalry troop behind him shifted nervously. They had signed up to fight hostile Indians, not to arrest war chiefs under flags of truce. Some of them remembered stories about what happened to soldiers who violated Apache parley customs. Red Hawk smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You would break a truce flag, attack under sacred protection? There is no sacred protection for murdering savages." "Then let us settle this according to the old ways," Red Hawk said calmly. He turned to Brennan. "White man, do you accept the test?" Brennan looked at Small Dove, seeing the hope and terror warring in her dark eyes. Then he faced the war chief. "What does the test require?" "Simple. You must prove your worthiness to protect a chief's daughter. Combat, if necessary, or wisdom, if you prefer." Morrison laughed harshly. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to stand here and watch some theatrical—" His words were cut off by the whistle of an arrow that buried itself in the ground between his horse's hooves. On the ridges around them, Apache warriors had risen from concealment, bows drawn and rifles ready. "You will stand," Red Hawk said quietly, "and you will watch. Apache law is older than your government, Captain, and you are on Apache land now." Small Dove felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. 3 cultures, 3 concepts of justice, all converging on this dusty patch of desert. Her uncle offering the ancient ways, Morrison representing corrupt authority, and Brennan, steady, honorable Brennan, standing between them all. "I choose wisdom," Brennan said finally. Red Hawk nodded approvingly. "Then speak your truth, white man. Why should the Apache Nation honor your claim to protect our chief's daughter?" Brennan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice carried across the desert air with the authority of absolute conviction. "Because she's not property to be claimed. She's a person who deserves the right to choose her own path. I don't want to own her or control her. I want to stand beside her as an equal and face whatever comes together." The war chief studied him intently. "And if she chooses to leave, to return to her people, then I'll help her pack and wish her well, even though it would break your heart?" Brennan glanced at Small Dove, and she saw the truth written plainly in his gray eyes. Especially then. Small Dove felt tears sting her eyes. No one had ever spoken of her with such respect, such recognition of her agency. Not the missionaries, not the slavers, not even her own people in recent years. Red Hawk was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. "Small Dove, daughter of Cochise, what is your choice?" She looked at her uncle, representative of the world she had been born to, then at Morrison, symbol of the hatred that had destroyed her family. Finally, her eyes found Brennan, the man who had seen her worth when no one else could. "I choose," she said clearly, "to stay with the man who gave me back my dignity." Red Hawk nodded slowly. "Then, by Apache law, you are under his protection. Any who harm you, harm him. Any who threaten him, threaten the Apache nation." Morrison's face contorted with rage. "This is insane." "Watch me," Red Hawk said softly. The captain raised his saber, pointing it at Small Dove's heart. "That woman is coming with me, one way or another, and if you try to stop me, I'll see you all hang for treason." But as Morrison spurred his horse forward, Small Dove saw something that made her blood run cold. The captain's desperate charge wasn't aimed at taking her prisoner. He was trying to kill her before she could testify. Morrison's cavalry saber gleamed in the desert sun as he spurred his horse toward Small Dove, murder blazing in his pale eyes. But he had forgotten that he was surrounded by some of the finest warriors in the Apache nation. Red Hawk's war lance struck Morrison's horse in the shoulder, sending both animal and rider tumbling in a cloud of dust and curses. Before the captain could rise, Apache arrows thudded into the ground around him, not killing shots, but clear warnings. "Hold." The tableau froze like a photograph. Cavalry troop with weapons half drawn, Apache warriors with arrows nocked, Morrison struggling to his feet with blood on his uniform. In the center of it all, Small Dove stood with quiet dignity, the eye of a gathering storm. "Captain Morrison," came a new voice from the ridge, "I believe you're out of uniform." Sheriff Hawkins rode down the slope with a small group of men, but these weren't vigilantes. Small Dove recognized the badges, federal marshals, their authority superseding even military command. Morrison wiped blood from his split lip, his eyes darting between the various armed groups surrounding him. "Sheriff, these people are interfering with a lawful arrest." "Funny thing about that," Hawkins replied, dismounting slowly. He pulled a folded document from his coat pocket. "Got a federal warrant here, but it ain't for the Apache woman." The sheriff unfolded the paper and read in a clear voice. "Captain Miles Morrison, you are hereby charged with conspiracy, murder, and trafficking in human beings, by order of the Federal District Court." Morrison's face went ashen. "That's impossible. I have connections in Washington." "Had connections," one of the federal marshals corrected. "Turns out some of those connections have been asking uncomfortable questions about missing Apache children, about gold that disappeared from tribal payments, about massacres that were supposed to be peace talks." Small Dove felt a surge of hope. Justice was possible after all, but Morrison wasn't finished. "You fools about civilizing this territory." He reached for his revolver, and chaos erupted. Morrison's first shot went wild, but it shattered the tense standoff like glass. His cavalry troop, confused and divided in their loyalties, hesitated just long enough for Apache arrows to find their mark. 3 soldiers fell in the first seconds, crying out as bronze-tipped shafts pierced blue wool. Brennan tackled Small Dove behind the water trough as bullets began flying. "Stay down!" Red Hawk's war cry echoed off the canyon walls as Apache warriors swarmed down from the ridges. They moved like flowing water, using every rock and shadow for cover. Morrison's cavalry, trained for open-field battles, found themselves fighting an enemy that appeared and disappeared like desert spirits. Pete emerged from the cabin with Brennan's spare rifle, his old hand steady despite the chaos. Patron, Morrison, had reached his horse and was spurring toward the barn, probably hoping to use it for cover while he escaped. But as he rounded the corner of the building, he came face to face with 5 Apache warriors who had been waiting in ambush. Surrender, Morrison. The captain's response was to empty his revolver at the nearest Apache, catching one warrior in the shoulder. The wounded man dropped his bow but kept fighting, pulling a knife with his good hand. "He's lost his mind," one of the federal marshals said, taking cover behind a wagon. Morrison. But Morrison was beyond reason now, cornered and desperate. He fought with the fury of a man who knew his crimes had finally caught up with him. He managed to reach the barn and barricade himself inside with 2 of his loyal sergeants. "We can wait him out," Hawkins suggested. Red Hawk shook his head. "He has done too much harm. Apache justice requires satisfaction." "This is federal business now," the marshal protested. "Is it?" The war chief's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Did your federal government protect our children from slavers? Did it punish the murderers of peaceful families?" Small Dove rose from behind the water trough, Brennan's protective hand on her shoulder. "Uncle, let me speak with him." "Too dangerous," Brennan said immediately. "He wants me dead because I witnessed his crimes. But what if I could get him to confess? In front of all these witnesses?" Red Hawk considered this. "You would face the man who destroyed our family? I would face him as Cochise's daughter, with all the dignity that name carries." From inside the barn came Morrison's voice, muffled but clear. "I know you're out there, you Apache bitch. You think you can destroy me with your lies?" Small Dove stood and walked toward the barn, each step measured and deliberate. Behind her, Apache warriors and federal marshals watched in tense silence. "Captain Morrison?" she called. "I am Small Dove, daughter of Cochise. I challenge you to speak the truth before these witnesses." "Truth?" Morrison's laugh was wild, unhinged. "The truth is that you people are nothing but savages. Then why did you sell our children to slavers instead of killing them?" The barn fell silent. Even the desert wind seemed to hold its breath. Morrison's silence stretched like a bowstring about to snap. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the desperate edge of a man with nothing left to lose. "You want the truth?" he called from inside the barn. "Fine $20 a head, and worth every penny." A murmur of horror rippled through the federal marshals. Even some of Morrison's own soldiers shifted uncomfortably, their faces reflecting disgust at their captain's words. "How many children?" Small Dove pressed, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her scarred cheeks. "Hundreds lost count after the first year." Sheriff Hawkins looked sick. "Morrison, stop talking." "Why?" "It's over anyway." The captain's voice cracked with hysteria. "You want to know about Cañón de los Embudos? Want to know why we really attacked?" "Tell them," Small Dove said, each word dropping like stones into still water. "Because Cochise wouldn't deal, so we made our own inventory. Business is business." Red Hawk's war lance trembled in his grip, barely controlled rage radiating from his bronze frame. Around the ranch, Apache warriors drew their bowstrings tighter, waiting for the signal to end this once and for all. But before Red Hawk could give the order, the barn door exploded outward. Morrison emerged like a man possessed, his uniform torn and bloody, a stick of dynamite clutched in each hand. His 2 loyal sergeants flanked him, rifles ready. Nobody moves. Brennan stepped protectively in front of Small Dove. "Morrison, think about what you're doing." "I am thinking." The captain's eyes were wild, pupils dilated with fear and rage. 16 years I've been building my fortune, and I won't let some scarred squaw destroy it. One of the federal marshals raised his hand slowly. "Captain, we can work something out. Plea bargain. Reduced sentence." "Reduced sentence?" Morrison laughed maniacally. "For what? Following orders? Cleaning up the territory? Making it safe for decent white folks?" Small Dove stepped out from behind Brennan's protection. "You weren't following orders. You were stealing children and selling them into slavery. Prove it, because all the evidence is in my saddlebags. And when this explodes—" He never finished the sentence. Red Hawk's thrown war lance caught Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending 1 stick of dynamite flying harmlessly into the desert. The captain screamed and stumbled, but kept his grip on the second explosive. Morrison's remaining sergeant raised his rifle, but Pete's shot from the cabin porch took him down before he could fire. The other sergeant threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. "The saddlebags!" Sheriff Hawkins and 2 marshals rushed toward the animal, but Morrison lurched between them and his mount. The remaining dynamite stick clutched against his chest. "Stay back." But Morrison had forgotten about old Pete, who had circled around behind the barn. The old Mexican's rifle barrel pressed against the back of the captain's neck. "Drop it, Capitan," Pete said quietly, "or meet your God with blood on your hands." Morrison's shoulders sagged in defeat. The dynamite stick fell from nerveless fingers to land harmlessly in the dust. As the federal marshals secured Morrison in iron shackles, Sheriff Hawkins opened the captain's saddlebags. Inside were documents that would destroy careers and topple governments, bills of sale for Apache children, correspondence with Mexican slavers, kickback payments to territorial officials, detailed records of Morrison's human trafficking operation. "Jesus Christ," Hawkins breathed, reading through the papers. "Morrison, you've been running the biggest slave ring in the Southwest." But the most damning evidence was yet to come. At the bottom of the saddlebags, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a leather journal filled with Morrison's own handwriting. His personal record of every transaction, every murdered family, every child sold across the border. Names, dates, prices. One of the marshals read aloud. He kept records of everything. Small Dove approached Morrison, where he sat shackled in the dust. The man who had destroyed her family, murdered her people, stolen countless children, now looked small and broken. "You kept a journal," she said quietly. "Why?" Morrison looked up at her with dead eyes. "Insurance, in case my partners tried to cut me out." He laughed bitterly. "Guess it's evidence now." Red Hawk stepped forward, his war lance gleaming in the desert sun. "Apache law says this man must die for his crimes." "Federal law says he stands trial," one of the marshals protested. "And what of justice for the children? What of justice for my sister's family?" Small Dove looked between her uncle and the federal marshal, then at Morrison, trembling in his chains. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, traditional justice versus government law. "Uncle," she said finally, "let him live." Red Hawk's eyes widened in surprise. You would show mercy to this monster? Not mercy. Justice. Death would be too easy for him. Let him live in a cage, knowing that every day the families of his victims know he suffers for his crimes. The war chief considered this, then nodded slowly. The wisdom of Cochise lives in his daughter. As the federal marshals prepared to transport Morrison back to Tucson for trial, Small Dove felt a hand on her shoulder. Brennan stood beside her, his gray eyes reflecting pride and something deeper. "It's over," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, leaning into his strength. "It's over." But even as justice was finally served, Morrison's words echoed in her mind. Half the territorial government was getting their cut. The captain might be finished. But the corruption he represented ran deeper than any of them had imagined. The real fight for justice was just beginning. 6 months later, Small Dove stood on the porch of the new cabin, watching the autumn mist roll across the Dragoon Mountains. The building behind her was larger than Brennan's original home, with architectural elements that spoke of two cultures coming together, thick adobe walls in the Mexican style, Apache symbols carved into the wooden doorframe, and a wide porch that welcomed both morning sun and evening stars. The federal trials had been a sensation throughout the territory. Morrison's journal had implicated dozens of officials, from territorial judges to Army quartermasters. The scandal reached all the way to Washington, toppling careers and forcing a complete reorganization of Apache policy. Morrison himself was serving a life sentence in a federal penitentiary, his fortune confiscated and distributed as reparations to surviving Apache families. More importantly for Small Dove, 63 Apache children had been recovered from Mexican households and returned to their people. Not all of them, too many had died or disappeared forever, but enough to prove that justice, however delayed, was still possible. The morning ceremony went well, Brennan said, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. His hair was longer now, worn in the Apache style that Red Hawk had taught him. Around his neck hung a silver pendant, a wedding gift from his bride's uncle. Small Dove accepted the coffee gratefully. Red Hawk says the spirits are pleased, that the land itself is healing. It was true. The ranch had become something unique in the territory, a place where Apache and white settlers could meet on equal ground. Families came to trade horses and pottery, to exchange medical knowledge, to allow their children to play together in the dusty ranch yard. Sheriff Hawkins, promoted to federal marshal after his role in exposing the corruption, had established a regular patrol route that protected both communities. "Any word from the territorial governor about the new reservation boundaries?" Brennan asked. "Red Hawk met with him yesterday. They're agreeing to our proposal. Traditional Apache lands around the ranch will be recognized as sovereign territory, but open to peaceful settlement by any who respect the old laws." It was a radical compromise, born from the ashes of Morrison's crimes. The federal government, embarrassed by the scandal and facing pressure from Eastern newspapers, had agreed to try a new approach to Apache relations. Instead of forced assimilation or military conquest, they would experiment with genuine cooperation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the main trail. Pete emerged from the valley, leading a small group of travelers, an Apache family with children, judging by their clothing and the way they sat their horses. "More refugees from the old reservation system?" Brennan asked. Small Dove shaded her eyes against the morning sun. "Well, no. I know that family. They're from my father's band." Her voice caught slightly. "Survivors." They watched as Pete guided the newcomers toward the cabin. The man leading the group was perhaps 40, with the weathered look of someone who had seen too much hardship. Behind him rode a woman and 3 children, their faces cautious but hopeful. "Small Dove?" the man called in Apache as they approached. "Is it really you, Black Wolf?" She stepped off the porch, recognition dawning in her dark eyes. "My cousin." The reunion was everything Small Dove had dreamed of during her years of exile. Family tears, shared memories, the warmth of blood connections restored. Black Wolf's wife, Singing Bird, had been Small Dove's childhood friend. Their children, born in captivity on the old reservation, stared wide-eyed at their famous cousin who had helped bring down the corrupt system. "We heard the stories," Black Wolf said, switching to English out of courtesy to Brennan. "How you faced Morrison, how you chose to stay with the white man who showed you honor." "And we wanted to see this place," Singing Bird added. "This ranch where Apache and white live in peace." Brennan stepped forward, offering his hand in the Apache gesture of greeting Red Hawk had taught him. "You're welcome here, all of you." Over the following days, Black Wolf's family settled into the rhythm of ranch life. The children helped tend horses and learned to read from Small Dove's carefully preserved books. Singing Bird shared traditional recipes with Pete, who added them to his repertoire with enthusiastic results. Black Wolf and Brennan worked together to improve the irrigation system, combining Apache knowledge of desert water flow with modern engineering. Most importantly, they talked. Long conversations around the evening fire, sharing stories of survival and loss, hope and healing. Small Dove learned about relatives she'd thought dead, about traditional ceremonies that had been preserved in secret, about young Apache who were learning to navigate between 2 worlds. "You did this," Brennan said one evening as they sat on the porch swing he'd built for her. "You chose to trust instead of hate, to build instead of destroy." Small Dove leaned against his shoulder, watching the stars emerge in the desert sky. "We did this together." In the distance, Apache signal fires flickered on the mountain peaks, not warnings of war this time, but messages of peace. Children's laughter echoed from the ranch yard, where young Apache and the occasional white settler's child played the same games under the same stars. The broken mirror from her first night at the ranch had been replaced long ago, but Small Dove had kept the pieces. Now they were embedded in a mosaic above the fireplace, fractured glass catching and reflecting light, creating something beautiful from what had once been damaged. "What do you see when you look in the new mirror?" Brennan asked softly. Small Dove smiled, her scarred face radiant in the starlight. "I see myself, finally." Friends, I've told you this story because it speaks to something deep in the human heart, the hunger to be seen, truly seen, for who we are beneath the scars life has given us. Small Dove believed no man could want her because the world had taught her she was damaged goods. Tom Brennan thought his war guilt made him unworthy of peace. Both were wrong. You see, there's a truth that the desert teaches better than any preacher, that the harshest conditions often produce the most beautiful things. The barrel cactus blooms brightest after the longest drought. The Apache learned to find water where others saw only death. And sometimes, 2 wounded souls can heal each other in ways no medicine ever could. This was never really a story about Apache and white, though that's how it started. It was about the choice we all face when we meet someone the world has cast aside. Do we see the scars, or do we see the person? Do we listen to the crowd's judgment, or do we trust our own hearts? Tom Brennan could have walked past that auction block, could have minded his own business, kept his $50, stayed safe on his ranch. Instead, he chose to see dignity where others saw only damage, and in saving Small Dove, he saved himself. The old-timers used to say that the desert remembers everything, every kindness, every cruelty, every choice that matters. If you were to ride through that country today, past where the Dragoon Mountains meet the sky, you might still find traces of their story. Not in any history book, but in the way the land seems to hold its peace, the way the water runs cleaner, the way the wind carries whispers of a love that refused to bow to hate. Sometimes I think we could all use a little more of that Apache wisdom, the patience to see past surface scars to the strength beneath, the courage to stand alone for what's right, and the faith that healing is always possible when two hearts choose each other freely. If this story moved something in your heart, if it reminded you that broken things can be beautiful too, then maybe you'd consider sharing it with someone who needs to remember that dignity and love still matter in this hard world.